But the old numbers, at their max, we were looking at a mortality rate in America of 4/100ths of 1%. We shut down the nation over a mortality rate of 4/100ths of 1%. In the 1600s, we had smallpox epidemics that had a mortality rate of 70%. Not 4/100ths, but 70%. New York City had the worst mortality rate. They were 0.4 of 1%. Philadelphia, 1793, had a smallpox epidemic that took out 25% of the city. So whether you talk about those epidemics, we've had 4 flu epidemics. We've had the Spanish flu, the Asian flu, the Hong Kong flu, the swine flu. All 4 had higher mortality rates than what we have now. Didn't shut it down. We had nearly 40 years of polio epidemics. Didn't shut it down. Even as late as President Reagan, we were having measles epidemics that killed tens of thousands of Americans. Didn't shut the government down. We didn't shut it down for cholera. Didn't shut it down for diphtheria. Didn't shut it down for scarlet fever. Yeah, all the others. So we've shut it down. Going back to something that Colonel West just pointed out, we have inalienable rights that come from God. The Declaration says there is a God. He does give inalienable rights. It's the purpose of government to protect it. First 3 things in the Declaration. The Founding Fathers said your right to work is an inalienable right. It's a God-given right. So much so that when you look at 1 Timothy 5:8, it says, if you don't work and provide for your household, you're worse than an infidel. You've denied the faith. So all the other times, we knew that the government's responsibility was to protect our right to work and earn an income for our family. This is the first time in America's history we've allowed anything to shut down the right to work, and government's taken it over. There is an insurrection going on. When I last counted about a week ago, we have now counted over 3,000 pieces of state legislation that have been introduced since the end of February that are dealing with trying to limit the government overreach on COVID. So legislators across the nation, they get that this is way too much. We the people don't like it. So 3,000 state pieces of legislation introduced that we've been able to count.
Amen.
Okay. Back to education. You know, once upon a time we used to teach history. Now it's been replaced by social studies, which is just some subjective, ideological agenda. We used to teach civics, but we no longer teach civics. I remember growing up as a kid, you remember ABC, you sitting there eating your Frosted Flakes and everything, you had Schoolhouse Rock, and I sang, and I hope and pray that I will, but today I'm still just a bill. Okay, so we were constantly, remember that, we were constantly taught and but we don't get that today. See, America is a constitutional republic. America is not a constitutional monarchy. We're supposed to be governed, not ruled by mandates, edicts, orders, and decrees. And that's exactly what we find happening. So what you have to understand in this constitutional republic is that no elected official has the enumerated power or right to determine who or what is essential. Remember, the most important and essential thing in America is liberty. So I think that what we have got to do is get back into our schools to educate, and some adults. I mean, people that are taking our, naturalization citizenship test, they know more about our history and our civics than most Americans do. And so it's very easy for folks to sit back and say, oh, okay, a president or a governor can go in and change law. But they can't. That's why you have a legislature. As a matter of fact, you just seen where in Michigan, the Supreme Court of Michigan has come down and said those orders that this governor's put out is unconstitutional. But until we understand that the Constitution is a restraining document on government, it talks about the respective rights that each legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch has. Think about this. We got Amy Coney Barrett coming up. And the fact that legislators, people in the United States House of Representatives, where I once served, said, well, we're going to impeach the president so he can't nominate someone to the Supreme Court. I mean, that's one of his Article 2 enumerated powers. That's his job. Your job is not to impeach a guy because you don't like the guy because he may nominate someone to the highest court of the land. And so we cannot have judicial activism. We cannot have judges making law. We cannot have an executive branch making law. We got to go back and understand who makes law in the United States.
So that's not what you do. So it first starts with all of us knowing what our rights are. Then once John Jay, original Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, had a great quote. He said, every citizen ought to read, and studied the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free.
Yep.
By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they're being violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. 7 words there. Know it, read it, know it, teach it, perceive when they're being violated, defend and assert. That's what we can do. And I will tell you, in polling wise right now as well, the younger generation, millennial Gen Z, they are the most relational generations in polling history. They respond more to one-on-one contact than any other generation we've had. So if you can learn something and teach them, they're going to soak it up. They're not getting it in school, but that's what every single one of us can do, is disciple someone else, learn it ourselves, then teach others.
And just for the record, the 3 branches of government are not the left branch, the right branch, and the central branch. It's the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. But I saw some of them going, there's 3? So yes, we've now cleared that up. Colonel, you mentioned that, liberty is something that has to be defended, and it is essential. But we see people utilizing a number of topics these days to take liberty. That they utilize the environment, they utilize racial division, they utilize all kinds of things, and they like to throw it under a canopy of inequality. They say there's income inequality, there's educational inequality, there's social inequality. As a nation, does the United States practice or adhere to inequality, or is it something that is being fabricated and utilized against us?
That's one of the things. We have worked to have a more perfect union. And you're looking at a kid that was born in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia in 1961 in a blacks-only hospital. I'm 59 years of age. My father was just a corporal in World War II in the United States Army. I was a lieutenant colonel, commanded a battalion in combat. My dad would have never thought, but he knew that it could happen. I became a member of the United States House of Representatives. When I was born in 1961, blacks could not go on Fort Lauderdale Beach, could not go over to Palm Beach Island, could not cross the intercoastal. On my 50th birthday, I'm the congressional representative that represents Fort Lauderdale Beach and Palm Beach Island. When I hear all this talk about social justice, what social justice really is the forced mandate of equality of outcomes. Because my life is about equality of opportunity, and America is about equality of opportunity. America says that no matter where you're born, no matter where you come from, here in the United States of America, with your own drive, determination, will, that God gives each and every one of us, you can achieve whatever dreams and hopes that you want. Is there inequality in everything in life? Yes. I wish that I was 6'5" and I could twirl through the air and do a slam dunk. But God made me 5'9". Now, is that fair? No, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to be all that I can be. I wish that I could, at the age of 60, I could go out and run a sub-4-minute mile. Ain't happening, okay? So yes, there's an inequality in everything. But the only thing that holds people back is themselves. And when I hear this Black Lives Matter movement and how it is making its way into the churches, I'm very concerned. Because this movement has nothing to do with the issues that are being faced in the black community. This is a Marxist organization. Yeah. Karl Marx had nothing good to say about faith and religion. He was a secular humanist. So again, it comes back to us being educated. What does it say in the Bible? My people suffer for a lack of knowledge.
David, you were mentioning qualities. One of the things we hear about that legislators are using to take control of the citizenry and make these laws. Environment is another one. How is the environment being weaponized to control citizens in the United States?
Well, I will tell you that it creates a fear. I was at an event and this gentleman said, you guys got to start talking about this climate change, global warming thing, because my children are telling me they don't want to have kids because the world's going to end.
And you mentioned that this week, The Hill, which is not a Southern Baptist Convention periodical, by the way, they wrote an article on on September the 28th, it said 1 in 4 adults under the age of 25 cite climate change as a reason not to have children.
That's a fear mongering. I mean, when you get the little girl from, what is it, Norway or Sweden, what's her name, Greta or something? I mean, she comes over here and she's all frantic and everything like that. And of course, you know, these are still the same people that take private jets, yacht and everything. But it's all about the fear mongering. It's fear mongering to get control of people. Now look, I'm 59. I grew up in Georgia. I remember when people were talking about we're going back into an ice age. We're all going to die because we're going to freeze to death. That really freaked me out. Because I'm in Georgia and you're telling me I'm going to freeze to death. So I go to my dad. I said, Dad, what's up with it? He said, boy, that's just a bunch of nonsense. But you see, what did I just say? I said I went to my dad. How many households in what community where a young kid can't go to their dad and the dad says, hey son, here's the truth. Here's what you need to believe and here's what you need to understand. And so what we have in America, what we have across the world, are people that are fear-mongering over these issues so that they can gain control and power. That's all this is. I mean, think about this in California now. They just came out last week, David, maybe you read about it. California came out last week and said that they're going to mandate electric vehicles in 2035. So that's what, 15 years from now? Yeah, your eyebrow went up. Now, they've got rolling blackouts going through California right now. And they want to mandate electric vehicles. You know, that's what the drill sergeant used to call stuck on stupid. But there is a contingent of people that you can drive them into that fear. But the good thing about the great state of Texas, we're not on the East Coast grid, we're not on the West Coast grid. Texas is so great, it's got all
See, David, this issue of the environment, it came up briefly in the interruptions of the presidential debate. And it was very...
I have something to say. No. You can't just stop having a conversation with your child when they become 16 or 17 or 18. Because there's someone out there always seeking to take your child's mind. And so we don't have a system of education in the United States of America anymore. We have a system of indoctrination. That's why I tell you, Pastor, the number one most important elected position in the United States of America, the school board. The elected position, the race that has the least amount of voter participation, is school board. And then you ask yourselves, how is it that young people are out there tearing down statues, doing what the Taliban did in Afghanistan, doing what ISIS did in Iraq and Syria? How is it that this is happening here? We stop training up our children in the way that they should go.
That's right.
Are y'all enjoying this conversation?
Absolutely.
One of the things that we've invited is for our audience.
We ordained the church. If you look in the Bible at the history, it starts with Adam, then Adam and Eve, and then Adam and Eve and their kids. So we've got an individual, then we have a family, then the world gets all screwed up, and God says, okay, let's reset, let's have another start here. Then when Noah gets off the boat, God says, okay, listen up, here's your civil laws. 7 laws we call the Noahide laws. Here's what you do with murderers, here's what you do with thieves, etc. Civil government starts right there in Genesis 9. We don't have a church yet, we don't have a temple yet. This is civil government. And if you look at civil government from that point on, that's why in Romans 13, those that are in civil government are, quote, ministers of God. The same word minister that we use for ministers of the gospel. So they're God's ministers because that's God's institution. One of the easiest ways I've seen to prove that is John Locke's 2 Treatises of Government. It was written in 1690. It was one of the favorite books of our founding fathers. Richard Henry Lee, signer of the Declaration, said they, quote, copied the Declaration out of Locke's 2 Treatises. 400 pages, less than an inch thick, He references the Bible over 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government. Now tell me government's a secular institution, and even if it were secular, I don't know, choose something that we think is secular, the Bible still addresses the principles that deal with it. There's nothing that we shouldn't cover in church, whether it's medicine or education, whether it's sexuality, whether it's gender, whether it's economics, whether you name it. It's covered in the Bible. And so it's definitely on stage to be able to cover at any point in time. And anybody who thinks, well, that's illegal. No. President Trump suspended the Johnson Amendment right at the start of his term. And by the way, he didn't suspend it because he wants evangelicals to help him. He suspended it because it's unconstitutional. We've spent nearly 9 years working with the group, nearly 9 years to get the IRS to sue a pastor, because if we can get that in court, we know we'll win, and the IRS knows we'll win. We've turned in more than 7,500 pastors trying to get the IRS to go after them because they talk about politics in pulpit. IRS won't touch them because they'll lose the case if it ever gets in court, which is why President Trump said it doesn't exist anymore. We have no legal limitations for not speaking. There is no biblical limitation. It's only limitations of our mind, and we shouldn't have that limitation.
But the key thing each and every one of you needs to understand is that President Trump did that by executive order. So President Trump is not President Trump. It's President Harris, because Joe ain't going to be around for long. But if it's President Harris, then guess what? She can get rid of that executive order. Because the Johnson Amendment is still law, it's still statute. So that's why you got to understand civics. And going back to something that David talked about, you have a person that said that they will use the executive order to get rid of the Second Amendment. That's one of your Bill of Rights. You don't get to keep the First Amendment if you don't have the Second Amendment.
That's right.
So that's why Christians need to study and understand, not just this book, but this is why I kind of walk around with this little thing. It's not real thick.
Like a Constitution.
They talk about America's Express card, never leave home without it.
It's a pocket
This is what you
Constitution.
don't want to leave home without.
Constitution.
Never listen to the Constitution.
So, as you mentioned the Johnson Amendment, there's a lot of people watching the
Groups that thought he was too closely tied to communists and other things attacked him for being pro-communist. And so when he got in office, he added a rider to a bill that went through without any discussion and said any one of those 501c3s, they can't talk about politics anymore. Well, number one, they've got the right of free speech. They've got the right to talk about whatever they want to or criticize if they want to. But he made that, and about 10 years later, the IRS said, oh my gosh, look at this. Churches are 501c3s. We can use this in churches. The guys with Johnson at the time said it was never designed to apply to churches ever. It was to go after really the Hunts here in Texas who criticized him through their funding and their money. It was to limit them, just them. And so the IRS subsequently applied it to churches, and it's never been challenged. And that's why groups like Alliance Defending Freedom and their pulpit project, they recruited, got pastors. I remember a good friend, Gus Booth, who was pastor of a community church up in north. They trained him and said, we want you to get in the pulpit, and we want you to specifically talk about candidates from the pulpit. Because we're going to turn you into the IRS. We want them to come after you, and we're going to get this in court. And so Gus, oh, good. It was. And bless his heart, he had this small little community church, and that morning when he walked out to preach, there was HBO and ABC and CNN all in the front row, and he's like, oh my gosh. But see, what they did was they said, look, if this gets in court, it's going to take 4 to 5 years. We want first off, you and your family have to be unanimous that they support you doing this. Then second, we want a unanimous vote from your church board that they support you doing this. And so there were, I think, 33 pastors had been trained in that first round. And Gus stood up and said, all right, we've got Barack Obama running and we got Hillary Clinton running. It's back, that tells you the time frame. And here's what they both say about abortion. Here's what they say about other things. Here's what the Bible says. Based on what the Bible says, you can't support these candidates. And so that was his sermon. Here's what the Bible says, here's what they they say. So turn them in. IRS has 6 months to respond. 18 months later, they still hadn't responded. They finally said, no, we think we'll let this one pass, as they did to all the other 33 that were turned in. The next year, I think there were 86 got turned in. The next year, 1,500 got turned in. The next year, 3,000 got turned in. And they're not going after any of them. We've been begging the IRS to come sue some pastor somewhere. So it was never designed for churches. They know that. History's real clear on that. It was designed for two political opponents, which was wrong in itself. I think if it ever came to court today, it would be struck down unconstitutional, but it's never come to court. They've never let it come to court.
That's right.
So,
Powers of control. All you have to do, you know, on the battlefield, you ask for an enemy that tells you exactly what they want to do, how they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it. I mean, they're giving you their battle plan. So, look at California, look at Portland, look at Seattle, look here in Texas and Austin. That tells you what happens if the other side gets control. And I always go back, much the same as what you just said, David. You know, Joshua was my favorite guy in the Bible. I think Joshua was an old paratrooper, and he was just, you know, all about the fight. Okay? But God told Joshua, this book of the law that I gave to Moses, you will not turn from it from the right or to the left. You shall meditate upon it day and night. You will have success and prosperity wherever you go. That's this book of the law, and it's also this book of the law that I carry here. This election is all about this very simple choice. It's the rule of law and law and order. It's the rule of the mob and chaos and violence. What you see happening on our streets is exactly what socialists, Marxists, communists, progressives have always done throughout their inception. And now it's come to the streets of the United States of America. And you're going to get more of that. It's the same as when we raise our kids. You know, it's Pavlovian. If you reward bad behavior, you're going to get more bad behavior. So you're going out to vote as to whether or not your church stays open. Because in California, churches ain't open.
That's right.
You're voting in this election cycle to make sure you can be safe and secure in your homes. Because when people are talking about abolishing police, which is ordained through the law, the safety and security, it's the exact same thing. And then they want you not to be able to defend your own selves. You know, that's the very first inalienable right that you have is life. Unborn and born life. Right. So, to me, this is not a hard choice. It's not a hard decision. It's whether or not you will stand up and do thus saith the Lord. 4 years ago, David and I have had this discussion before, but I want you to understand something. 4 years ago, the Christian community dialed it in. To the tune of about 25 million Christians did not vote in 2016. 25 million. You can't do that in this side. No. In America, we want you to be a victor or not a victor. In America, we believe in the individual, their rights, their freedom, their liberty, their sovereignty, which comes from God, not to be collectively subjugated. In America, we believe in economically empowering you, not economically enslaving you. Those are the choices you have to make in this election cycle. But first and foremost, it's the rule of the law. This book of the law and that book of the law that was handed down from our founding fathers. If you stay on the side of the rule of law, it's not about party, it's not about a person, it's about what's right as opposed to what's wrong. And I'll just conclude this by saying, and I'm sure this is going to make some waves, good versus evil.
Yep.